My youth in Plymouth, certainly from the age of 10 onward, revolved around fishing and more fishing. But before I could go fishing, I had to learn to go crabbing. In where I'm standing now, along what we might call Vauxhall Quay, was my prime crabbing spot. It was also particularly good for catching prawns. In the 1960s, the harbour side was full of warehouses, and the harbour itself was virtually empty. There'd be a few hulks on the other side at a Marrowbone Slip, and of course in the middle was the famous John Mackay, a cable ship laying boat. But today the harbour is jam-packed full of masts. It's a sea of masts and fiberglass. There was also the added excitement of would a train come along the railway lines one day. It never did, but when you're a little lad, the thought that it could was quite substantial. The harbour is full of masts every way you look. And here we have what was the Sea Angling Centre. This is where, when I was 14, 15 and 16, we would go out fishing for eels way out past the Eddystone on wrecks. And maybe fishing on wrecks from World War I and World War II stimulated my interest in history. I always wondered if one day I'd hook up a bomb, a torpedo, or something like that from a sunken ship some 20, 30 or 40, 50 fathoms below. In later years, the Sea Angling Centre moved to the building here. I don't believe there is such a thing as a Sea Angling Centre anymore. When I was much older, I realised that the building here, certainly on the first floor, was called the Sailing School. However, that was not the name it went by amongst my friends. It was known as the Groin Exchange, or the GX. I'm afraid to say I never went there, and my part of education here never happened. Looking back on things, I wish I did. I have no idea what could have happened in there, but with the luck I've had, probably not much. Do any of you remember when the building that is today called the Boston Tea Party was an antique market, and a good one? I remember in the winter about 1992 maybe, that it was the first building I ever saw sprayed with artificial snow. It was very, very good. Here we can see the harbour absolutely chock-a-block of fiberglass and masts. A little bit of space there, but I'm sure it'll be filled. Back in the 19th century, there was a sewage tank, a sewage holding tank, just under here. And the lamp on it was allegedly lit by sewage gas. I think today it's electric. I think it's an LED. For many years when I was a lad, this area across from here was occupied by the tall ship, the Kathleen and May. I've no idea how many years it was here for, but it seemed a very long time. And today it's one of the last bits of open water in the harbour. It's hard to think that people come here to see a medieval harbour. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps they come here to eat, because everywhere you go today on the Barbican is a restaurant, a bistro, a bar, a cafe, a takeaway. It's quite amazing how many there are. Many people will not know the building across here was the Fish Quay police station. It's almost unbelievable to think of that now, but today it's the home of the world famous Captain Jasper's. It was here that I moved on from crabbing to catching fish. And the particular fish I went for here on these steps was smelt. My friends, schoolmates and other friends of mine would come here and we would catch smelt, only about 4 or 5 inches long, but great fun. Of course, this area in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and after that was absolutely full of fishing boats, where today it's more masts and fiberglass. No fishing boats at all. And of course, this used to be the fish market, where you could come early in the day and buy fresh fish, or as a lad, I would come in here and ask, any fish guts, mate? Any fish heads? And I would use that for crabbing. There's no one to ask now. They've all gone, all moved away. From my point of view, the Barbican has lost almost all its heritage. I struggle to feel any history here. To me, it's actually all plastic, just like this wall of plastic vegetation on, of course, another cafe. It was just along here that in the late 1970s I nearly lost a good friend of mine. After a night getting drunk, he walked along here on his way home, and this would have been probably 10:30 because the pubs didn't open all night like they do today, and he walked off the edge here and went into the sea. Luckily there was a rope there tied to a fishing boat, and he hung on until he could be rescued. It was in the middle of winter. I won't mention his name because he'll be very embarrassed, but I'm very glad to say he's a healthy old man now like me. As a teenager, I knew how to treat girls. I spared no expense, but of course I had no cash. I was in pocket money. So where did I bring them? For a coffee or tea, I brought them here to what was the Acropolis Cafe, a particularly ugly building, and yet somehow Plymouth has managed to replace it with an even uglier one. It's quite good how they do this. It's not easy to be this crass. As much as I understand new architecture fitting with old, and sometimes the contrast between old and new architecture is good, in this instance, I don't see any good in this building whatsoever. If someone had wanted to make a building that was more ugly and more unfitting to go in Plymouth, this is it. We can really see here how full the harbour is. Absolutely jam-packed. And these boats will probably cost easily in excess of £250 a month to have here. So the marina is making a whack out of these. And of course, in those far off halcyon days of the 60s and 1970s, this wasn't here. It's known as the prawn. I quite like it. That's perhaps because I'm a bit arty. As I got a little bit older, I moved on from crabbing. I moved from crabbing to smelt, and then I moved along the harbour to here, where the quest was pollock. Of course, the bridge wasn't here, the dock wasn't here, it was a different situation. But I had moved on, and the fish were getting slowly bigger. These days you cannot fish off the end, and you cannot look across to the East Pier. My pals and I were often amazed at the size of vessels that would come in here to unload coal. They were huge, And there was literally only a matter of an inch or so, maybe a foot, that let them pass here. Today, of course, we've got the National Marine Aquarium behind us. For those of you who want a better look, there's the prawn. And here, of course, we have the Mayflower steps, which of course are not really here, but we won't mention that. The Mayflower steps, as such, i.e. where they left, is believed to be somewhere across the road in the toilets of the Admiral McBride pub. The reason for that is that this entire area was not the same in 1620 as it is today. Totally different, very hard to comprehend how it would be. So the Mayflower steps we have today were constructed sometimes after, but it does give a valuable focal point for those who do not want to go to the toilet in the Admiral McBride. And here we have them. My memories here are catching the boat to Bovissans, catching the boat to Corsans. The excitement was indescribable, yet my grandchildren would not be particularly enthused about going to either of those locations because they've done so much, where when I was a lad, I had done so little. A really good thing is the fact that Plymouth is now connected by sea to various other places, not just Bovissans or Corsans, but to Mountbatten, the Royal William Yard. Let's not forget, back in the day, you could get a ferry from just along from here to Turnchapel and Arreston. So all we're doing is nothing new, we're just doing something old. Here we can see the prawn and the lock gate and the bridge. The Marine Aquarium, Queen Anne's Battery, with another field of masts and fiberglass hulls. These boathouses here are often thought to be air raid shelters from World War II. I think they'd be pretty good at it, so they may have been used, but as far as I know, they weren't official. However, I know that one of them was the headquarters of the Plymouth Sea Angling Club, and on the Sunday afternoon, my pals and I would come here to weigh our tiddly little fish we'd caught in a competition. And if we were lucky, we got a certificate. This meant everything to us. Times were simple. However, these here are definitely World War II air raid shelters. And as far as I'm aware, they were built to order. They'd have had sandbags around the entrance, and the roof is pretty thick. And of course, these windows would not be here. The doors look pretty impressive. We just have to wonder the evenings and nights spent in here while the city was ablaze. Just across, of course, we have what was the Mayflower Sailing Club. Phoenix Wharf, this is called, and it's where back in the day the passenger ferries to Arreston and Turnchapel left from. It's also where in more recent times the dockyard and warships vessels left from. I think they probably leave from the Mayflower steps now. Now, of course, it's no longer the Mayflower Sailing Club, and just yet one more eatery and drinkery, nice as it is. Here we have the old Mayflower Sailing Club that is now Pier Master's House. It's built on Phoenix Wharf. I often wonder if it's called Phoenix because this whole area, back in the day, the 1800s, was a centre of emigration to the United States and Australia. Rebirth, Phoenix. I don't know, but it sounds it could be the case. Getting older, I needed to catch bigger fish. So I'd come here in the night time with my dad to catch pollock and mackerel, not realising the incredible history of what we have here. But that's another video, another day. Fisher's Nose is still a popular fishing place today. And you can actually buy the bait and the tackle on site, which you couldn't do when I was young. In the late 60s, this pier on a summer's evening would be absolutely ram-packed with anglers. Where today, we have the history of an iron bollard that was probably used for the emigration vessels as they came along here. And also this concrete slab here used to support the starting guns for the races at sea. I'm not sure if it's still used, but I well remember there were lovely little things about 1.5 feet long. Getting older, I had to catch bigger fish. So I had to leave fishing here and go elsewhere. And I went to West Hoe Pier, which is that way. Here we are at West Hoe Pier. We would always fish from the pier on my right, which would be the West Pier. Hardly anybody ever fished from the East Pier. And here we have Rusty Reg, which is very Plymouth. People still fish here today. I remember we used to have to pay, was it 10p or 50p to fish here all day, and somewhere round about here was a little wooden hut, and then you'd pay your money to fish and you'd be given a little white bit of paper, a sort of receipt that entitled you to fish. Also of interest here was in the harbour a fleet of small boats driven, I think, by petrol, and for the pricely sum in 1970, I think it was 50p an hour, you could hire these boats self-drive, and they would take what, 2, 3 or 4 people. My pals and I had a brilliant idea that we could come here and drive out to the breakwater, which we did. Can you imagine that today? Hiring a boat with kids less than 16, driving out to the breakwater. It was even worse than that. We then came up with a brilliant idea that if one of us took out the boat at, say, 7 o'clock in the evening and left the rest of us on the breakwater, that person could come back the next day early in the morning and bring us home. What a thought today, leaving children on the breakwater all night. It was fine, nothing ever happened, and we all grew into law-abiding, responsible citizens. Many of you will remember this building here as the headquarters of, I think it was the Great Western Yacht Club. Very famous yacht club throughout the world. Internationally status. Where has it gone now? I do not know, but it is another eatery. Time moving on, I needed different fish, bigger fish, and more adventure. So we moved to Rusty Anchor. Tremendous fishing spot. Rusty Anchor is just along here. We'd often come here in the evening in a storm and play on the rocks. Nobody said to us that we shouldn't. Nobody said on the TV that we should keep away. We loved it, and we all survived. Rusty Anchor is the area of rocks just below here. It was just about here there was an iron ladder going down to the rocks for the convenience of the anglers. It was there certainly until the 1990s, but it has now been removed, probably during health and safety audits. As a young man here, I could not appreciate the beauty of the building behind. I certainly do now. An attempt at our naval heritage is made at Rusty with concrete models of warships. No, they're not concrete. I think they're metal, steel. While this may be all very good, what we need in Plymouth is the real thing. This will not attract visitors here. This will not fill hotel beds. You go to other places, Portsmouth, Chatham, and many of the vessels that are linked to Plymouth are there. Where in Plymouth, we have nothing but replicas. This one's made of concrete. I've just spoken to a lady here this morning sitting in the sun, and she remarked they weren't very good. She then further remarked they were good enough. And this really is the story of Plymouth, isn't it? What we get down here is good enough. Not the best, maybe not what we deserve, maybe not what the #1 naval heritage city, possibly in the world, certainly in the Western world, should have. We have nothing here. Nothing at all, but this one's made of metal. Having abandoned Westhope here, I realised that my future was here, MILLBAY Docks. MILLBAY Docks was a fishing paradise for me. My schoolmates and myself would spend every weekend there, almost every day in the school holidays. We'd come home plastered in fish muck and slime, and we would do it all again the next day. It was wonderful. In those days, you could buy a fishing pass, and it would be regularly inspected by the dock policeman, who would walk around and say, "Show us your passes." It was a white bit of paper the size of a postcard. It was the key to paradise. Yet today, MILLBAY Docks is merely apartments, apartments, and apartments, a few restaurants, a bistro, and the trip to France and Spain. Not the docks I remember. That would be another video. And here we are at MILLBAY Docks today. We've got the lifeboat station here, which is obviously excellent, so close to the water. The lifeboat being in the harbour, just behind the flats. Ahead of us is Cork Pier, now fenced off, soon to be flats I'm certain, possibly a restaurant, who knows. In the day it was the most excellent fishing spot for large pollock from the end, eels from the end, underneath in the winter, grey mullet by the score. We have one building plot left here, and we have to wonder how long can that be. When the fishing passes were stopped in MILLBAY, no doubt to health and safety, despite the fact I don't recall anyone being injured in the many, many years I fished there, I had to seek other places to fish. And I moved out to Penley Point and Rame Head. And Rame Head was where I spent most of the rest of my teenage life. And that would be another video. I hope you've enjoyed this little film. There will be others. Some of you are quite taken back by my opinions on Plymouth, especially in the way it handles its history. Well, I'm allowed to because I was born in Plymouth. My whole life has been here. Education, work, everything's based around Plymouth. I remember playing on a bomb site. I remember the city centre proud and clean. I remember things as they were. That's just not me looking back through rose-coloured spectacles. It's a fact. And therefore, my opinion matters. See you soon.